everybody's, first of all, has to have a good New York pizza story. But on the topic of food, you've been featured now twice in the New York Times, in their food, 3 times, I missed that third, in the food section on different unique foods that have come into your palate over the years. So first was on an Italian dessert called tartufo. The second was on the squab. Now what was the third? I cannot...
The third was about the McRib, which sadly has not been available in the New York City area for the last 4.5 years, and I don't believe it'll be available in the local regional New York City area as well this year. So actually, this is to anyone out there who's creating their own comics. You have to sort of, you don't want to be a jerk about it, and you don't want to be annoying, but you have to promote your content. If you're spending your free time for no money, right, making a passion project, you have to promote it on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, things like that. I had created the Greenpoint comics. Then I started to do comics that were autobio, but about being a comic book fan. And I did a comic about voting to kill Jason Todd when I was a teenager, which is when this happened, in 1988 or 89. When they did that phone vote death of Jason Todd, I was finishing up high school, and I did a comic about what it was like to vote to kill Jason Todd. And again, weaving in some of the history for people maybe who were not Batman fans, or for people who maybe didn't care about Batman. I wanted to write that comic in such a way that even if you didn't give a bleep about Batman comics or superheroes, it should function in my mind as a documentary. Even if you laugh at comic books and you don't like comic books, everyone knows Batman. So I wanted to take the reader through why this was a significant development, that they actually had a phone vote to kill Robin or to save Robin, and why this was a society benchmark. This is a watermark. We've never had, not really since either, there's been no HBO show, there's been no major television show where the readers determine the outcome of a major plot point. And so I did that. That got picked up in New York Magazine and Vulture, and then it got to the attention because I was promoting it on my Twitter. It got to a guy named George Gustines, who is one of the writers for the New York Times about comic books. He is their main writer. He has written over 700 bylines covering comic books and pop culture for the New York Times. So we started to get to know each other through Twitter. We became friendly over time, and eventually I had the idea that I wanted to do a comic about this weird Italian ice cream that I was obsessed with, called the tartufo. It is like a bonbon. It's a big ice cream scoop covered in hard dark chocolate. And I Googled it, and I found that other than some small articles, I'd stumbled on a topic. There were very few articles, even in the prose food world, about this ice cream. And I thought, okay, I have a crazy idea. I want to do the definitive short story comic about the history of this ice cream, and also why I was personally obsessed with this ice cream. And I thought, if I'm just going to do this for free and for fun, like I've done all my other comics, and if nothing else, I want this to be to function as the definitive summary of the history of this ice cream. Because the articles that I'd read in food magazines were small. There wasn't one in I don't know, whatever the biggest food magazines are. They didn't really cover food and wine. Yeah, I don't know. So I showed it to George at the New York Times, and I said, I'm just going to put this on a small blog, whatever. I know a guy who's Ellis Rosen, who's now a big, multiple New Yorker cartoonist, but back then was trying to get his stuff somewhere. And he had a website called Blunderbuss. I thought, I'll show it to Ellis. Maybe he'll put it on Blunderbuss. And my friend at the New York Times was kind enough to say, before you put that in a small webcomic, let me show it to the food section. You never know. Who knows? And to myself, for my own, you don't want to get yourself too psyched up or too hopeful. I thought, they'll probably just chuckle and pat me on the head and go, that's nice, young man, and send me on my way. But something like lightning struck, and they liked it, and they offered to run it in the New York Times, which was a far better scenario than I had ever dreamed. And then that led to a relationship with the food section. So then they were like, what else do you want to pitch us now that you've done one? And I sent them 12 pitches for stories about unique food. They are picky, they are selective, as they have every right to be. They are the New York Times. And I'm just a dude who's drawing comics in his room. And they rejected all but one. And that pitch was suggested by an old friend of mine, so I credited him in the comic, because without his suggestion, I never would have done the comic. He suggested I do a comic about the fact that pigeon, baby pigeon, otherwise known as squab, S-Q-U-A-B, was a major food source for humanity going from ancient Egypt to the late 1800s in America after the colonies and after we had gained our independence. So I did a comic about the history of human consumption of squab. Then the next comic I had, I thought, I'm obsessed with the McRib. I got to do a comic about the McRib. They're going to laugh me out of the room. They're never going to accept this. Another urging all comic book creators, writers out there, illustrators, I felt certain the New York Times would laugh me out of the room. Why would they ever do a comic about the McRib? It's too kitschy. It's too lowbrow for the New York Times, I said to myself. And it's about McDonald's. Like, they're too classy for McDonald's. Like, why would they ever cover this barbecue thing, fake pork patty? And they went for it. And actually, the other key thing I want to tell any creators out there, in each of these instances, I'd written and drawn over half the comic when I pitched it. And I honestly think it's like, I'm also an actor, it's like a filmmaker. If you do a trailer for your movie, that's a lot likely to get investors interested. And I don't mean a trailer where you take scenes from other movies. I mean, you go out with your friends and you shoot an actual trailer. You know what I mean? A proof of concept, they would call it. If I hadn't written and drawn detailed, basically shown them roughly half of the finished product as I envisioned it, I don't think they would have said yes if I had just shown them little sketches and stuff.
So your topics have come from, for lack of a better word, an obsession with finding out more information about something or somebody.
That's very true.
And
yeah.
One of your newest ones that actually around here got some press around the anniversary of September 11th was how you found out the story of the only female member of the NYPD to die on that day. Tell us a little bit about this woman and her story.
So I mentioned earlier that I lived in Greenpoint for 23 years, which was the basis of all these comics. And then I moved to Hoboken to live with my girlfriend, Jennifer, who is wonderful, and I'm thrilled to live in Hoboken. And I ended up taking the ferry quite often. Now the ferry, obviously, I never really had taken the ferry much. I'd taken the East Side ferry, I think, from Greenpoint to Midtown Manhattan. So I was taking the ferry quite a bit. And the ferries at that time were named after, the ferries are named Thomas Jefferson. The ferries were named things like Betsy Ross, Father Michael Judge, the priest who was killed on 9/11. And one of the ferries was named Moira Smith. And when one of the other ferries, by the way, was named the George Washington, as I said, Thomas Jefferson, I thought, who's Moira Smith? That she's standing alongside these shoulders of these giants of American history and New York City history. And why do I not know who Moira Smith is?
And you felt like you had to know.
I felt like I had to know. That at the time they had a plaque, a small plaque, saying that she was the only female NYPD officer to perish while saving others' lives on 9/11. And I thought, this is fascinating. Why do I not know about this person? I immediately went to Google, researched. There's a number of prose newspaper articles about her, but not many. And they were mostly from Newsday, the Long Island newspaper, precious few from Manhattan newspapers. There were a few from the Post from quite a while back, and there were a few from the Daily News. And I thought, this is my next comic. I want to do a story telling everyone who this was and having a slight autobio element, how I found out. I thought how I found out would be may be interesting for a reader as well, that it was based on this fairy that was named after her. So, and again, whenever I do my comics, you've hit upon something, Kate, that's very true. It's sort of like I'm playing journalist. Not playing, but I'm trying to be a reporter in a sense and tell you why I found this interesting and why I think a total stranger who has no reason to give a crap about me or what I find interesting, why you, a total stranger, might find, hopefully, this interesting as well. And so I spent a year doing that comic. Then I wanted a colorist to work on it because I can color okay, but I don't know Photoshop. I don't have enough faith in my coloring abilities. I want a real professional colorist or artist. And I thought, this story is about a female hero. Wouldn't it be great if I could find a female colorist or illustrator to color it? Because I'd done a lot of comics with a guy named Sir Griffin, who'd illustrated and colored a lot of my Greenpoint comics. He colored some of my New York Times comics. But I wanted a female for this, and much the same way now that, you know, you want to hire a female DP for your movie. If you're a female director, you want to have more females on your crew than is typical. So I stumbled onto, we went to West Elm, and West Elm in Hoboken was doing a program where they wanted...
Which is a furniture store, if you don't know what West Elm is.
Furniture store. It's like Bed Bath & Beyond or things like that. Pottery Barn, correct. And they were doing pop-up things for local artists. And they were giving this woman named Morgan McHugh a table for 2 weekends to sell her artwork. Now, Morgan McHugh, who I discovered, is an incredible illustrator. She makes my art look like fourth grade scribbles. She's an insanely gifted illustrator and painter all by herself. And, but her watercolor work was phenomenal. And I thought, it was like lightning. I saw her work and I said, Morgan, I know you don't know me, but I've done several things for the New York Times. So at least I felt like she would take me seriously, maybe, you know, that I like had a credit that she might take seriously or care about. And she agreed to do it. She was a little tentative at first because it was about a sensitive subject, right? Would my writing present the information in a way that was respectful and delicate and you know, like a news article, and would I handle it well? And Morgan was an incredible collaborator, and I thought, her art is so great, if we work together and this gets in the New York Times or something, I want to use this to shine a spotlight on her artwork and get her name more out there. Because I think if you've gotten anywhere, you have a duty to pay it forward and shine the spotlight then on other creators, other writers, other artists. So we did debut the comic. The New York Times thought about taking it. They didn't take it for various reasons. And it debuted as a webcomic in a British website called The New Statesman. I'm still looking for someone to put that comic into print, by the way. And someday I feel like it will find a home, a proper home in print, maybe as an anthology somehow. Yeah,
I mean, next year is the 20th. We are 2 years from now is going to be the 20th anniversary of September 11th. So yeah. So my other question, just following up on that, has Moira Smith's family seen this comic? And if so, what have they thought of it?
Yes. So I wrote this. I put a lot of effort into the writing of my stuff, and especially this comic about police officer Moira Smith, because I thought, I don't want to consult the family. I didn't want to reach out to the family while I did it, because I didn't want them to have a chance to say, we don't want you to do this or whatever. But I really worked hard to say to myself that as if the New York Times had hired me. That's kind of what I did. Like, I pretended that some prestigious place had hired me. I wanted to write it in such a way and present it in such a way that I would do my best effort such that if the family saw it, that it might be good enough for them and that they would be pleased that some total stranger had taken it upon himself for a year for no money to do this. And thankfully, they did see it very rapidly, because it turns out a cousin of mine named John Giretti, he sits next to someone who's very close with the father, Moira's widower, her husband, James Smith. And so it got to him very rapidly. And thankfully, the daughter of Moira and the husband of Moira Smith were very, very pleased. Then it was wild. her oldest friends from childhood began reaching out to me, and I was just so pleased that everyone involved, the family and friends, felt it had done her justice, and that it was appropriate, and that it was respectfully done. So honestly, it may never get into print, it may never have a second life, but the fact that her family and friends felt pleased with it is all the payment I needed.
So when you draw, are you still using pen and paper, or have you moved to a digital medium reflective of the fact that you are making webcomics?
I am still drawing pencil and paper. I recently got an iPad Pro. My girlfriend got me for one actually for my birthday, and I have very little free time in which to draw because I'm also an actor and I'm doing other things and still have a survival job. Don't lose that survival job, artists. Sometimes you may need it. There was just actually a thread on Twitter. Summer Pierre, who's a very successful graphic novelist, writer, and artist, she was talking about how it's important until you're, solvent and making enough real money to quit your day job. It's important to have some income coming in. Anyway, as a sidebar, I have yet to begun to learn how to use a digital pencil, an iPencil, on an iPad Pro. I'm still drawing by paper. I feel like one of those horses that you really have to push and kick to be drawn into the new era. I'm very sluggish with that. If I was a trust fund person or financially independent, or had some 3 commercials running that I could quit my job, I would have a lot more free time in which to learn to draw digitally. Maybe I will someday, looking up to the heavens. But for now, I still love drawing on paper and pencil. I think even when I eventually go digital, because I have to learn Photoshop, I need to get with the times. I need to get with what the kids are doing. I'm in my 40s, and most other illustrators are doing digital. Or you draw something as a pen and paper, then you scan it, then you can tweak it and ink it digitally and color it digitally. I need to eventually learn to color my own stuff, so I need to get there. First, I need to finish my new Greenpoint comic.
Yes. Finish the Greenpoint comics first. Then you can learn, you can play digital. So.